Good evening. I'm attorney Lawrence Berliner. I'm an attorney in the field of special education law. And tonight we are continuing, I can't believe this, Jane, our 5th year of doing these webinars. Co-host is Jane Faherty. She's an advocate and director of the JumpStart program at the Stamford JCC. Jane can go over her background. And we have one of our returning champions, and I mean that sincerely, Allie Grafman, who's generously in the past and tonight has contributed her time, wisdom, and knowledge and experience to making these webinars as meaningful as we hope they are to you. We have many questions. I will say right up front, we may not get to all of the questions given the allotted time. We are dealing with our 5th year of doing these webinars on topics of interest, primarily in the field of special education. We're part of even though this all started back in the COVID-19 pandemic, we are still continuing to learn through these Zoom webinars. We're part of a community of concerned parents, professionals, advocates, attorneys, learning how to connect with one another. Jane and I have been moderating a series of workshops on a variety of topics. And what we thought we would do, since we're just past the beginning of the school year, we would have a roundtable. And we received many, many questions. So we don't have a specific topic in mind tonight, other than answering a lot of questions. We have Allie Grafman, who's an advocate, who will be participating, and we'll be dealing with back to school issues, or now that school has been in session about 2 or 3 weeks now, parent input, parent requests for PPT meetings, preparing for the meetings, independent evaluations, and other topics that have come in during our break for tonight's webinar. I think, what was it, May was our last meeting. So we're past the back to school sales. The Halloween candy is out. I've even saw some Christmas supplies. So, fall and winter are on its way now that summer's over. We all start the school year with the highest of hopes and expectations. And we hope, Jane and I, and with Allie's contribution, that those hopes and expectations will continue throughout the school year. And you will see progress, meaningful progress, gaps that have been identified are closing or starting to close. Your child's academic skills, social skills, emotional skills, coping skills are improving, and you as parents of children in special education will start to see progress, and anxiety on the part of your child, anxiety on the part of parents will start to dial down. That's the hope, the expectation. But this next school year will determine whether or not we are going to meet those expectations. So without further ado, let me have Jane introduce herself. And right after Jane, Allie Grafman will introduce herself. And we will get right to topics that have come in. So we thank all of you who have given us questions and topics based upon your concerns. Just before we begin, I do have a disclaimer that I want to read. The webinar is being recorded. I should add that everybody who has signed up for the webinar will receive a copy. Those that have not can see it on YouTube. Is that correct? Okay. The information in this webinar does not constitute specific legal, educational, or professional advice regarding you or your child's circumstances and should not be relied upon as such. The webinar does not establish an attorney-client relationship with myself, or a professional relationship with either Jane Faherty, the Stamford JCC, or Allie Grafman. By signing up, you've agreed to receive emails about future webinars and events from the Stamford JCC, the Law Office of Lawrence Berliner, LLC. This recording, we're using the Zoom platform. It's a third-party provider, not an agent of or associated with the law office of Lawrence Berliner, the Stamford JCC, Allie Grafman, or Jane Faherty. Information that we provide during the webinar is based upon Connecticut law. We do have some questions from other states. We'll do our best, but we are based here in Connecticut, so our information is based upon the practices, procedures, laws, policies that we use here in Connecticut, as well as the federal law that covers all 50 states. If you're watching this webinar from another state or country, you should need to check your own local jurisdiction to see how your laws or policies may differ from the information that we're providing this evening. So without further ado, Jane, I want to turn that over to you. And then Allie, if you can introduce yourself, and we'll get into what we have. I don't know, about maybe about 20 or 30 questions so far. Oh, one other thing, if you're going to ask questions during the webinar, please do not use the chat feature. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your computer. The webinar is being recorded and the chat feature is recorded. The Q&A is not. So if you want to maintain privacy, confidentiality, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your computer screen and not the chat. And speaking of the chat, I believe we put all of our contact information in the chat, so you can get a hold of any of us later on if you choose to do so.
Good evening. Thank you, Lawrence. And thank you, Allie, for joining us again tonight. So I'm Jane Faherty. I'm the Executive Director of a program called JumpStart. JumpStart is located in the Stamford JCC and also the Maritime Odyssey Preschool in Norwalk. JumpStart is a program designed for toddlers with developmental delays from age 2 to 3. During that program, we provide one-to-one support or two-to-one support, and then I help those children transition into the public school at age 3 if they are eligible and transitioning from the birth to 3 system. In addition to that, I have completed my COPAS Seat 2 training, and I have my own private advocacy business. And I'm very lucky to advocate for children throughout the state, in elementary, middle, as well as high school. I've been doing this for a decade now, and it's wonderful to be part of this community. And another piece to the puzzle is JumpStars is an organization that I oversee, where we really try to bring families together, particularly parents and caregivers, in person to enjoy social recreational activities, because whilst we're doing this virtually and have been for nearly 5 years, which is rather frightening, we do believe it's important to have that connectivity in person and to create that sense of community in those relationships. So if you follow social media, JumpStars, you'll see some fun things we have planned for the upcoming months. But Allie, it's lovely to have you back here this evening. We have an awful lot of questions to get through, a variety of different topics of conversation. Regrettably, we seem to always have the same questions to answer, which means maybe we're not doing such a good job, you know, as a state to resolve some of these continuing problems in within education, and particularly special education. But it's a delight to have you here to join in the conversation.
Thank you, Jane and Larry. Good evening, everybody. I am Allie Grafman, and I am the owner and director of ABC Advocacy, LLC. I have been an advocate for, it's going on 11 years now. Prior to that, I was a special education teacher from pre-K all the way through high school. And then I became an administrator in special education. Upon retirement, I didn't actually retire, I started advocacy. So I'm thrilled to be here again tonight. We've been doing this, as Larry said, for what, 5 years now. To me, the onset of the school year is my most favorite time. It stemmed back from when I was in teaching. As a teacher, you have the opportunity to work with families and provide opportunities for huge amount of success and progress with each and every student. You have the year ahead of you. So we hope, and I'm sure we all agree, that each and every one of you, if you are parents, have a positive experience this school year. And welcome to our webinar. Thank you for coming tonight.
So where should we begin? We have so many questions and so many topics.
I think we're going to begin with one question. I'm going to break it down into two parts, one part for you, Allie, and then the second part for you, Lawrence. So Allie, let's start at the beginning. What is a PPT meeting? Our world is full of acronyms, and not everybody understands all the acronyms that are presented to our families and friends.
Don't you love those acronyms when you go to any meeting, right? IEP, PPT. The PPT stands for Pupil Placement Team meetings. Okay, so it is a formal meeting and a formal document called an IEP, an acronym for Individual Educational Program, will be developed. It is a legal document that will be developed. The PPT is designed to have significant stakeholders involved. Those are the people that are working directly with the student that is going to be discussed at the meeting. So an administrator has to be there, a related service person needs to attend, administrator or administrator designee has to be there, as well as the special educator. The general ed teacher has to be there, and any other related services personnel, such as speech and language, OT, PT, and etc. So those are the essential participants at the PPT. The purpose of the PPT depends upon why you need to meet. Often, especially at the beginning of the year, it could be considered a referral PPT. We may get into that a little bit later in this webinar, but that is a meeting, a formal meeting to discuss the reasons why the particular student is having difficulties, and then to determine if an evaluation needs to occur and what the components of that evaluation will be. Another possible purpose would be to review evaluations, whether it's a triennial evaluation or an initial evaluation. There's a multitude of reasons for a PPT. Parents and guardians should also realize that they can call or request a PPT at any time they feel it's necessary. So the proposal for a PPT does not necessarily have to come from the school. The parent can request it. It is mandated that a PPT occur annually, once a year, and the annual date depends upon when the student began his or her own individual educational program. PPTs are also required to review evaluations and to discuss a 3-year evaluation called a triennial review. So basically, that's what a PPT is. And as I said, there's a variety of reasons for a PPT, but it is a formal meeting.
One question I have that often comes up, for those students that have paraprofessionals, whether it's a one-to-one or paraprofessional that works with your child and another student, often parents say to me, I really want that paraprofessional to participate in the PPT because they are the individual that is actually with my child throughout the entire day, maybe specials, maybe actually the therapeutic sessions. But quite often it is a challenge to get those paraprofessionals to actually attend PPT meetings. What's your advice to families that would wish to have paraprofessionals participate at the PPT meeting?
So as a parent, you could certainly request a paraprofessional, especially if the paraprofessional is with your child for a good part of the day. But this request needs to be made prior to the PPT. So when you, maybe you would request a PPT in writing, and at that time, you would ask for the paraprofessional. I believe it is mandated that the paraprofessional attends upon your request. Larry, you can verify that, but I believe it is mandated by the state.
That is correct. Here in Connecticut, there is such a law. A lot of people aren't aware of that. And but then the question, if the teacher's with your child and the if the teacher's with the PPT meeting and the paraprofessionals who's minding the store. So there's always that, trying to find the right balance there. So, but it is the law.
So I have another acronym for you, Larry. This is the second part to that same question.
Mm-hmm.
What is the process of obtaining an IEE evaluator once it is approved? And any ideas of the wait list? So almost how long is a piece of string?
Well, thank you. Another acronym is IEE, which stands for an Independent Educational Evaluation. And what the education piece is, any school district evaluation is an educational evaluation, whether it's an OT, occupational therapist, speech and language, PT, physical therapy, psychological, psychiatric in some cases, rarely on a medical. Sometimes physicians are doing evaluations for the school district. So anytime we're dealing with a school district evaluation, that parents have to disagree with the evaluation, they're entitled to a publicly funded independent evaluation. Now, if they have great insurance or money's no object, you can get your own private evaluation. But when you ask for a publicly funded evaluation, the school district has two choices. They can say yes, or they can say no. There's not a third choice, and that is ignore the request. So first of all, it has to be an evaluation and a screening for all children in a classroom to see what their reading group is or their math level is not an evaluation. So it's a formal evaluation of speech, OT, some of the examples I gave you. So when you disagree, you have to request a publicly funded independent evaluation. You don't have to get into a long-winded explanation of why you disagree, but you just have to make sure you're disagreeing, preferably in writing. So the school in Connecticut, we have a policy that the schools could take up to 10 days to respond to your request for a publicly funded independent evaluation. If they come back with an answer that's yes, then you will provide a name of an evaluator, and the evaluator the school will determine if they meet their qualifications. For example, if they have to have a license or a PhD or certain kinds of certification. If the school says no, within a reasonable period of time, which isn't defined by law, they have to file a due process hearing against the parent on the sole issue of defending their evaluation. Our evaluation is appropriate. You, the parent, are not entitled to a publicly funded independent evaluation. Many parents receive these requests for due process hearings filed by school district, and they're intimidated by it. They have to hire a lawyer. They have to take a day off from work. Some parents think they're being sued for money damages. Except for the last one, all of that's true. So when you're requesting an independent evaluation, you have to really think about it. It's also a good idea to have somebody in mind, but if you don't have somebody in mind, the school can suggest, but not compel, that you use an evaluator off their list. There's one district I deal with that has a list of evaluators. 2 or 3 are private evaluators that I make referrals to independent of that list. So if you have a list of school district evaluators, they're okay with you because they're working for you and your child, not the school district. That's why they're independent. And within that, we had a question this evening, why don't independent evaluators make recommendations for out-of-district placements? Well, that's not their role. Their role is to evaluate your child and come up with recommendations, which may be add more services to the IEP, change the programming, maybe change the placement. So the independent evaluation is not only about an out-of-district placement, it is trying to find out what is really going on with a deeper dive into your child's strengths and weaknesses. I had a case many years ago with a speech and language evaluation, and the school district evaluator wrote a very short report and found no issues. And the school agreed to the independent evaluation, and the speech and language pathologist wrote like maybe a 20, 30-page report. And I asked her, I said, why is your report 20 or 30 pages and the school's maybe 5? And she said, it's very simple. I'm in private practice. I could spend as much time as I want with the child. And that poor public school speech and language pathologist had probably maybe 20 reports to get done that week. And she gave the child as much time as she could. And that's why her report read one way, and that's why my report read another way. Doesn't mean one was right, one was wrong. We just had more information. And that's the luxury of being in private practice as a psychologist, speech and language pathologist. You know, you can control better your schedule, how many people you want to see each day, each week. The schools, on the other hand, have timelines. If it's an initial evaluation, they have to get that done within 45 days. If it's some other kind of evaluation, they want to get it done on, before the annual review PPT meetings. So sometimes these evaluations bunch up, and the schools don't have the resources or the time to do that deeper dive. So it's important that parents know the independent evaluation is part of your procedural safeguards. In Connecticut, there's a specific page devoted to that. And if you go on the internet and look up independent educational evaluations, you'll get a lot of information from our state Department of Education, ct.gov, and the United States Department of Education, which is ed.gov, and that's the Office of Special Education Programs, known as OSEP, has a lot of resources.
One thing that we've been talking about for 5 years, Larry, is data, and how data enables a parent as well as schools and practitioners to track the child's progress throughout a school year. So, Allie, we had a question asking, how do you get a school to collect data when interventions are being provided? But and also, how often and what is data that should be collected? It's a very large topic. We could have a whole webinar on data alone, but Allie, what are your thoughts about that piece?
Well, you just said it, Jane. Data is a general term, and not everybody is on the same page as to what data needs to be collected. And so when we talked about a PPT meeting earlier, at that PPT, a lot of these nebulous questions need to be answered and determined. So what data do you need to be collected? That would be the first question. And that should be written in the summary of the IEP that's being developed at the meeting. Everything needs to be documented. So what data do you need collected? Secondly, ask how that data will be collected. What are the timelines or the periodic intervals the data will be collected, and who will be collecting the data? The next thing you would ask is how that data will be interpreted to you as a parent or guardian. And so will the school psychologist or the BCBA, the behavioral analyst, talk to you or somehow communicate with you through email on what the data is, how it is interpreted, and what next steps will be determined after that data is collected. If your child is not making progress with that data, what will happen next? More interventions, more services, maybe more observations need to be taken, whatever it is. So I agree that data is important, but we first have to define what the data is and then document all of those elements on the IEP.
I think we also have to agree who's going to collect that data as well. is it going to be a paraprofessional? Who is actually going to be responsible for collecting that data? And also, what are the qualifications of those individuals collecting the data as well? I think data, as you said, is such a general term that's used, but also as parents, don't forget you are also able to collect data. Data can be documentation. So when your child is completing, for example, homework, you can put anecdotal notes on that piece of paper that's returned to the school. You can give the teachers information. How long did it take your child to complete that piece of work? How many prompts or questions did they need to ask you? Did you need to provide guidance for them to do it, or were they able to do it independently? And what is independent? Independent is not hand over hand. Independent is not when you potentially have to, well, it depends on the child. Are you having to read the question for them to answer, or are they reading it and doing it themselves? So there's a lot of data points that you as a parent can also contribute towards collecting this information that can then be analyzed to track and monitor your child's progress, as Ali said, over certain periods of time. And those periods of time should be agreed upon at the PPT meeting in order to monitor, track, and provide baseline data to see if your child is making meaningful progress or are they plateauing. And then you can tease out the reasons why the progress might not be as smooth as you would wish, or why the plateau is actually happening.
Jane,
Yeah,
just to piggyback on that, I often suggest to my parents that they request data team meetings in between PPTs, because not every meeting has to be a formal PPT. So a data team meeting would involve the personnel or the staff that work with your child, and you go over the data, prioritize what data you want to review at each team meeting. So that's a really very effective and helpful way to collaborate and talk with each other about the progress or lack of progress that your child is making through these data team meetings.
Yeah, those are good points. And I just want to add one thing. Parents are a very important source of information. That's the data. You see your child outside of school. If they've learned a skill in school, then they should be able to generalize it to another setting, home, community. And the federal laws talk about PPT meetings and the development of IEPs based upon the concerns of parents to enhance their child's education. That's either a direct quote or a substantial paraphrase of the federal regulations. Work samples, many times parents have work samples that show how well or less well their child is doing. I've had some parents say, let me show you a video of my child at home doing X, and you're reporting Y in school and X is happening at home. So there's many ways to collect data. There's multiple sources of data, but parents are a very important source of that information.
I think the key to it is collaboration as well. This was the topic we touched on before we started recording the webinar. And the thing as a parent is you have to recognize that you are a key component to collaborating, bringing information together at the table, bringing these different individuals together to help collaboratively understand who your child is, and together to collaborate on how to help your child meaningfully engage and connect and make meaningful progress throughout their day, and to generalize their experiences as well. So collaboration is the key, and that is best accomplished through information being collected and shared. But another question we had in was, how do I ensure my child is exposed to the same curriculum as her classmates, despite her attention span being a challenge, and the child, in this instance, the child has difficulty remaining seated during a session or class?
Well, my understanding legally, the IEP is supposed to be aligned with a common core curriculum. That's what I see. And sometimes I see it too literally aligned with the curriculum and not the individual needs of the child. But we want our children to succeed. They should be able to succeed in school. They should be able to succeed in life. The Common Core curriculum was put together by a group of so-called experts in the field of education, good, bad, or indifferent. That's the curriculum we use here in Connecticut and many other states. So if that's going to be the measure of progress, if that's going to determine the trajectory of your child, then they should be exposed to that. We can modify the curriculum. We can give extra time. Somebody had asked in one of our questions about accommodations. Extra time is an accommodation, or modifying the work. So there are many ways to try to have our children achieve commensurate with their ability, with the curriculum that all the other children in the school are being exposed to. And the hope, the expectation is they're going to come out on the other side with the same knowledge. It may take a little longer, it may be a different path, but they're going to end up at the same place as the other children.
And Allie, can you think of examples of accommodations or modifications that might help a child access a curriculum more effectively?
Sure. Accommodations are usually implemented in general ed classes. It can be implemented in other areas, such as the resource room and learning centers and so forth. But the general ed teachers really need to know what those accommodations are for each child. So in order to access the curriculum, grade level curriculum, accommodations such as reinforcing or reviewing class notes or class lectures by the special ed teacher when and if the child is seen in a resource center, that would be an accommodation. Previewing is another great accommodation for the special ed teacher or even a speech and language teacher to work with the child on content that will be discussed in general ed before the child even gets to the general ed class. So in other words, if the special ed teacher and the general ed teacher know what the content of the material of instruction will be, the special ed teacher can give the student prior understanding of that content. And that's a great way for the child to be able to attend even more in the general ed class, because the student will be able to pick up that content more readily, knowing that there's prior connections to that content. Rephrasing directions and reinforcing directions is another example of an accommodation to access curriculum. Depending upon the child's area of weakness and certainly deficits, there's other techniques such as sensory strategies that can be implemented to help the child attend more frequently in class and to be able to access the curriculum. So there's a variety, and again, it depends specifically upon the child's needs.
I think the other thing that I do at PPT meetings is about collaboration and remembering the external resources that can come in to help inform for accommodations and modifications. So there's specialists in the district that will be there for reading, for assistive tech, that may be for visual impairments, hearing impairments. Those individuals should participate in trying to help make sure that there are the right modifications and accommodations for your child. So bring these experts in and brainstorm together, because even though your child might not receive direct services from one discipline, that area of expertise might have some value to add and be able to provide some insight as to what suggestions could be made and modifications as well. So cross-contamination pollination between experts in a district is also a really valuable way to come up with more creative ways to accommodate and modify practices to meet your child's specific needs as well. I think sometimes we get entrenched in our own silos and forget that by brainstorming together, we can be much more creative and help a child through different lenses and not just see it through one paradigm is also extremely important too.
So Jane,
just to add to that, accommodations are not only for children with IEPs. You could have somebody who may have a physical limitation and they get to use, say, the teacher's only elevator to get to the second floor, or they may need a piece of, they may need a desk that's raised slightly so they can move their wheelchair or get a specialized chair to accommodate their physical limitations. So it's not only programmatic accommodations, sometimes there are physical, barriers that have to be removed, programmatic barriers that have to be removed.
Good point, Larry. One other suggestion I have, if your child is older, like upper middle school and high school, I think it's really important that your child knows and understands what accommodations he or she has, so they can advocate for themselves. I often find that students sit back and don't ask for the accommodation that they need. So if the child knows what those accommodations are and certainly understands the extent to accessing them and the significance that the impact of those accommodations that have on their learning, he or she will advocate more frequently. Also, ask your child if they are older, or if he or she is older, what helps you learn? Often these kids know more than we do about themselves. What do you need in this class to help you study or help you retain the information? Oftentimes we forget to ask our own kids, and I think that's really important understanding that we have to. Jane talked about collaboration. Collaborate with your own child as well.
I love that, Allie, and that leads into another question we had. How does the transition from middle school to high school impact the IEP and changes for that child? Thinking of older children.
Each transition lends itself to a different team of staff members that work with your child, and also different procedures, settings, and expectations. And so very frequently, or I would say most of the time, a transition PPT is held in the springtime before the child enters into, let's say, from elementary to middle or middle to high school. At those transition meetings, it should be expected that a representative or a team of representatives from the receiving new school attend that PPT and explain to the parent and the team what new procedures or new elements in the school day will impact their child. Often the receiving school team members have recommendations for schedules and how the IEP may need to change. For example, service time in the middle school could look very different than the elementary school. When students change classes, maybe the classes at middle school are only 45 minutes compared to maybe elementary school. A block of time for any subject could be 45 to 60 minutes. Often, especially in high school transitions, we have block schedules or rotating schedules. I'm not going to get into that, specifically, but that does impact the service delivery time in the IEP. So that transition PPT is really important to gain more of an understanding.
Yeah, and the resources and the expectations also differ. There may be, I don't mean this, all grades count, but the grades for high school really count because those are the ones that are showing up on an official transcript. And you want to make sure that in the high school, the scheduling, for me, I always see it's a process of subtraction, that if you want this service, we have to take it away from somewhere else. So if you want more speech and language, we're going to take it away from the music class, or you won't take a world language, or you're not going to get the elective you want. So looking at the schedule, understanding how the high school differs from middle school, or how middle school differs from elementary school, is very, very important. So you're not, caught off guard, which sort of dovetails with one of the questions, preparing for the PPT meeting, making sure you have a clear understanding of your child's needs, the lay of the land at the school, the staff. If you've had a PPT meeting in the spring and you're starting the school year, make sure all the promises, all the assurances that were provided to you in the spring are there in the fall when your child arrives. Did the teacher resign over the summer? Are there new policies? We just saw in Connecticut, a lot of school districts are not allowing cell phones in school. We had a change in the date of the kindergarten enrollment. So you want to make sure you as parents are not being caught short with changes over the summer or between the end of the last school year and the beginning of the new school year. I have seen schools that changed their attendance policies. Let's see, another one was attire. You can't wear certain clothes that you could wear last year. So you want to make sure that you as parents are as prepared as possible, and you understand the lay of the land, what changed from last year to this year. How does the new school, if you're going to a new school, differ from the old school? And it all comes back to data. You want to be able to share your experience as parents with the team. It is a team, you're part of that team. And these are ways you as parents can prepare for these PPT meetings. Because I always say, no one knows your child better than you as a parent. And don't let anybody tell you otherwise. You see your child every single day in multiple settings, and you are, according to federal law, a very valuable member of the team, and your concerns for enhancing your child's education are, part and parcel of developing their IEP.
I'm going to combine two questions that we received, and Lawrence, I'm going to direct it at you primarily, but obviously, Allie, I know you'll have experience with this too, as we all do as advocates. If a parent is dissatisfied with the public school system and the school that their child is attending, and they want to begin to look for out-of-district placements, private school options for neurodiverse children, how do they go about doing that? And what then, depending upon how they do it, what then is the answer with regard to tuition reimbursement for a special education school? It's a complicated answer because it depends upon which avenues and choices and conversations have taken place. But I want to start with you first, Lawrence, and then obviously, Allie, it will segue into your experiences and ours as advocates too.
Well, we always start with a concept called a free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. That's the federal law. Free is without direct cost to parents, public and education or the school district, and it's the word appropriate that we are often disagreeing. Congress never defined it. The US Supreme Court in a series of decisions gave us some contours as to what that word means. It means that the IEP is based upon your child's unique needs, not what's available. It's based upon respecting procedural safeguards. You get notice of the PPT meeting you attended, you had meaningful participation. You have an IEP that's conferring meaningful educational benefit. They know a lot more today than, say, a year ago. And you as parents are seeing the progress generalized to other settings. The other piece is the least restrictive environment. Because the federal special ed law is a civil rights law, some school districts say it's a spending law. No, it's a civil rights law where Congress created for the very first time a substantive enforceable civil right for children with disabilities to attend their public schools. There were states other than Connecticut that excluded children with disabilities for a variety of reasons. So the least restrictive environment means a child with a disability will be educated alongside, to the maximum extent appropriate, children without disabilities. Now, when you see a child not receiving the free appropriate public education, they know less today than a year ago. They're regressing in skills, their behaviors are increasing. This is where school district evaluations data that's being collected, sometimes outside evaluations, doctors' letters, are helping parents establish a denial of a free, appropriate public education. And if we get to a point in a child's career, educational career, that they cannot succeed in school, then there are, in Connecticut and all other states, there are options. We have a list of approved private special ed schools here in Connecticut, and most nearby states have that list, have their own list as well. And if a school, private special ed school, is on the approved list, a PPT could make a placement, doesn't mean they will, at a private special ed school. Now in Connecticut, there are some private special ed schools that are not on the approved list. And what does that mean? That means a PPT would not place that child at that school for the reason it's not approved by the State Department of Education. Whether it's approved or not approved, if your request for an out-of-district placement is denied by the school district members of the PPT meeting, then you have rights. You have a right to go to mediation. You have a right to go to a due process hearing. It's always advisable to speak to qualified professionals, including attorneys, at that point in your child's career before you launch a request for a due process hearing. So if the PPT makes the placement, they will provide tuition, transportation, basically pay for the private special ed school. If the PPT denies the placement, often in Connecticut, at least I am, able to negotiate a settlement agreement. The school will pay X%, and whatever's not covered by the school district, the parents will pay Y%. We write that up as a settlement agreement, and life goes on. So all of this comes back to that central theme of free, appropriate public education. Some schools will say an out-of-district placement violates the LRE, least restrictive environment, but the least restrictive environment is tied to the free, appropriate public education. You can't have one without the other. So I don't know if, Allie, you have a different experience, but that's my.
No, I think you summarized it pretty well, Larry. You know, when clients ask me that question in many different ways, but the substance is the same, I always suggest to them to start keeping the data, again, tracking everything, keeping data information daily on behaviors, any parent-teacher conference that seems that there was any evidence of a problem that the student is having. Your information also needs to come directly from your child. If your child is saying something about something that happened in school, make sure that you document that as well. A really good source of evidence would be to look at, if your child already has an IEP, to look at the progress monitor. It's called the IEP Progress Monitoring Report. That is given usually either every quarter or every trimester, along with report card reporting. So the progress on the IEP goals are documented on that report. If you see that your child's progress is not being made, either they're not showing adequate progress or your child is regressing, then that is really good evidence for you to show that this particular public school placement is not working for my kid. Another resource, and Larry, you mentioned evaluations, but I also would suggest that you make sure you have the information on all the benchmark performance assessments that your child has done in school. These benchmark assessments are usually done 3 to 4 times a school year. They are assessments that compare your child to another child, or to children in the school, as well as the state and population nationally. So you will see how your child compares to grade level expectations in that benchmark performance assessment. That's another good resource to look at. Also, ask the teacher for benchmark performance assessments. Those are it could be daily, not daily, but maybe weekly or monthly assessments that the teacher would give to assess the child's learning on any particular unit of study. So those are really good resources to keep and utilize as evidence to show that your child is not making adequate progress, and that will definitely verify the need for out-of-district placement.
The big thing that I'd like to say, we just had a question in saying, where can I find the list of state-approved special education schools? What I would like to say, in my experience of advocating and placing children out-of-district placements, an out-of-district placement special education school is not always a silver bullet. You have to do your own research. Not all, just because a school is listed on the state approved list, it does not mean that that school hasn't had its own contentious issues, its own concerns, its own investigations. You must do your own due diligence, and your child might not be the right profile or the right fit for a school that is provided on a list. Every school is unique, as are the children, and you really have to do your own research. You have to find a program that is the right fit for your child. Not every special education school will accept your child if they don't feel that your child is an appropriate student for their population, or they might not have the resources to meet your child where your child's at. The other thing too, when you do place your child in an out-of-district placement, you are going to be then contending yourself with a community that isn't maybe in your neighborhood. Your child won't necessarily have access to neurodiverse, other neurotypical peers for that role model with communication, language development. So whilst you might find one that's the right fit, it's not always an easy journey to do that. And just because they're on that list doesn't necessarily guarantee the quality of education within that school, or indeed that it's the right fit for your child. So I just want to put that caveat in there. It's not always the silver bullet.
The due diligence is so important. Visit the school, talk to parents, see that school in action, because sometimes it's not the panacea we hope. We received a couple of very quick questions on students with dyslexia, this evening, and one from the questions. The one we received this evening had a student with dyslexia in foreign language. Sometimes foreign language is as difficult as learning English. So I have seen students get exemptions from foreign language as part of a 504 plan or an IEP. That may create problems at time for college admission, but you may have to deal with that then. But I have found some schools offer American Sign Language as, quote, the foreign language. And for some reason, I've seen a lot of my clients take Latin if it's offered. I don't know why. Maybe Jane, who speaks the King's English, could explain that better than us, in the colonies here. But that's the out-of-box thinking that was being discussed earlier. For the student who has dyslexia and they want to take the IEP away, in order to determine a student is eligible for special education, we need evaluations. In order to determine that a student is no longer in need of special education, the school has to do evaluations. IEPs are not supposed to be forever. Sometimes they are. IEPs are supposed to be as long as the child can benefit from direct instruction. That's the goals and objectives, the related services, the accommodations. And if they no longer need that, then maybe a 504 plan with accommodations and modifications might be sufficient. So in order to find a child eligible, evaluations. In order to find a child no longer eligible, evaluations.
So another question with regard to evaluations. This came in before the webinar. Why, in this experience, why do psychologists in elementary schools push back to complete ADHD evaluations for students? I haven't necessarily found this to be the case, but this is an experience that some parents have been finding.
I saw that question. I was wondering too, because I haven't found that difficulty. But the ADHD evaluations are usually through what we call a checklist or behavioral checklist. It's not an evaluation that the child is actually being administered. It's a checklist or an interview type of assessment. So I don't know why school psychologists wouldn't do that, but the school psychologist is not the only one that can disseminate that checklist. You could ask other administrators in the building or related services people. Most students that have IEPs have case managers. So you could ask the special ed teacher to disseminate the checklist. Don't forget, you as a parent are also entitled and should be asked to complete the ADHD checklist. So,
I have one answer. I don't know if either of you have heard it. Medical. That's a medical condition, and a medical doctor has to evaluate it. I don't know if you've heard that, but I have heard that.
Yeah, I've heard that.
But you're absolutely correct. It was the Connors or some of the rating scales that are out there, which are done by school staff, can establish the likelihood of ADHD being more prevalent or not.
An ADHD diagnosis can be diagnosed through the school. There is a medical diagnosis and a school-related diagnosis. The school-related diagnosis really needs to show the impact of the attention deficit on the child's learning. So yes, you can get a medical diagnosis, but I believe that the school would also want to do their own ADHD assessment and work with the teachers on that behavioral checklist. So there should be no resistance to passing out that checklist. If there is, I would definitely go back to a PPT and determine the reason for that, because that is certainly your right to ask for an evaluation in that area if your child's experienced difficulty.
Jane, we have a question directly for you dealing with early intervention programs. Since you're running an early intervention program, how do we access this? You talked about in your introduction, what JumpStart is, but there's a process of getting a school to provide it, developing goals and objectives. You have experience with that?
Yeah, so early intervention in the state of Connecticut begins from birth to 3 is the first stage of early intervention in our state. In other states, it goes from birth to 5. There are organizations such as STAR, however, who are private practices that will provide intervention from birth through to age 8. And then pick it up at a later date. So typically when a parent, pediatrician, friends or family members identify that there's a developmental delay in a student, a parent is encouraged to call 211. Through 211, you will then be referred to a birth to 3 provider within the state. In Fairfield County, there are a number of different organisations you might be referred to. It could be Ableist, TheraCare, Beacon, Benchmark, or STAR, just to name a few, or TheraCare. If your child is then evaluated by that birth to 3 agency and is deemed eligible for services, your child might begin to receive some sessions of speech, physical therapy, occupational therapy, behaviour supports, as well as cognitive social play supports through a teacher. When your child turns 3, and during that time, you might be referred to the JumpStart program. Our program, we are not state funded. We work in collaboration and partnership with Birth to 3 in the sense that the JumpStart program offers toddlers with developmental delays. They do not need to have a diagnosis of any formality, but just be recognised as needing support in a developmental domain. They can then join the JumpStart program for up to 6 hours a week. We are unique because the way in which we are funded through a foundation. The students in our classrooms receive one-to-one support typically, but those that have less delays but still recognise delays might receive a 2-to-1 support. During the time in the classroom, they'll be exposed to different activities that typical toddlers are exposed to: circle time, snack time, cause and effect toys, sensory tables, fine motor skills, gross motor skills. When the child, about 6 months before a child turns 3, their birth to 3 providers will typically submit an application to the child's public school district, forewarning the district that this child is coming in having received early intervention support, and would then need to be evaluated by the school district team to see if they are eligible to continue to receive related services at the district's expense. So if a child is then deemed eligible, so the child will then go through a process of evaluation, which will involve a meeting with the district, a PPT1, evaluations, and then a PPT2 to then decide eligibility. At that time, we received another question that said, what are the laws for ASD that differ from developmental delay? So while a child is under the age 6, you can transition a child into the public school if they have been identified through the evaluation of the public school district as having developmental delays or needs that need to be met. They don't need a formal diagnosis. They do not need an ASD diagnosis to qualify for eligibility to receive an independent, to receive an IEP. The catch-all phrase is developmental delay because it is recognised that we might not be able to tease out exactly what's going on with that child or the underlying reasons why there's a developmental delay, but we recognise it exists. The child is not able to communicate in the same way as a normally typically developed child is at that stage. So we use the catch-all developmental delay. That catch-all box that you tick should not drive the delivery of services or the goals and objectives of that IEP. It really, the child's IEP would be the same if they're the ASD diagnosis or any other eligibility criteria. It's typically just because we're not really sure exactly what the diagnosis might be, but we do recognise that they require support from the public school, just as they did in birth to 3, if that were the case. So the quality of the early intervention programs does vary district to district, as do the resources. Some districts offer more days a week, longer periods of time during the day, but every district should create an IEP for your child, which should take place at PPT meeting. When you are transitioning into a public school, you can invite your birth to 3 providers to participate in that PPT meeting so they can share their knowledge, their expertise of the things they've worked on with your child, the strategies that they've already used, examples of areas of growth, but also maybe areas the child is still struggling in. And they together, along with any private practitioners you have, help create and shape that IEP and the related services that are going to be provided to meet your child where they're at, to diminish that developmental delay that they might be exhibiting at that point. But not all programs are created equally, which we know with school districts in general. It should be that every child receives the same support irrespective of a school district, but that tends not to happen because of resources available, regrettably. But an early intervention program should enable your child to receive an IEP that allows them to continue to make meaningful progress to diminish that developmental delay that might be appearing between them and their neurotypical peers.
We're closing in on our appointed hour to end tonight's webinar, but we have a couple of quick questions that we could end. One of the questions that came in tonight was, are there sources of low or no cost advocacy services? I'm aware of some organizations, and I know there's one organization that provides grants. How about Jane or Allie, are you familiar with any?
The Special Education Legal Fund, acronym itself, SELF, they do have an application process that you can apply to. I think the applications are currently open you would have to complete their application process, and then you might be eligible to receive some financial support to hire an attorney or hire an advocate. Other organizations in the state of Connecticut, one is Favor, which again, you would need to complete that application process and see if you are eligible to receive support from an advocate at no cost to yourself. There are limitations to how many hours of support they can provide and periods of time and how long that support can continue for. But those are a couple of organizations that you could reach out to. But I do acknowledge and recognize that advocacy can become expensive for families, as can hiring an attorney. But what I would say is, don't let problems manifest and become larger. The sooner you are able to advocate for your child and nip something in the bud, the sooner you can get your child the support they need. And trust your own intuition. If you get the sense that your child's needs are not being met sufficiently in the school, don't feel shy and unable to communicate your concerns directly with the school, and really start to try and address those concerns that you might have. Any niggle is worth paying attention to and listening to.
Just to add to that, Jane, the state of Connecticut also offers a parent advocacy center that you can get up on their website, and it's a volunteer system where advocates and other experts in the field can certainly work with you to answer questions and help you navigate any troubled areas that you may be experiencing. However, they do not have personnel that come to PPT meetings or so forth, but they will talk with you, usually over the phone, to help you, resolve or navigate any issues that you may have.
And if you're contacting the Connecticut Parent Advocacy Center, which has an acronym of CPAC, make sure you put in Connecticut Parent Advocacy Center, because you may get another CPAC, not that one. Lastly, or second to last, we have a question on how does laws for ASD differ from developmental delay? These are legal definitions, but in Connecticut, developmental delay ends at age 5. We have 14 categories of eligibility. These are legal definitions. Developmental delay is one. So if your child is no longer developmentally delayed due to autism, due to age, but they might have autism, then the PPT would discuss that. And then finally, there was a question about what are the latest legal updates. In the state and federal courts, there's not much going on, but in the legislative bodies, both here in Connecticut at the General Assembly and in Congress, there are many proposals that will be coming online in Connecticut after the first of the year. it's very important that you reach out to your elected officials, especially if they're running for election or re-election, and find out what their positions are on issues that are important to you. We have several task force that are going to be issuing reports on various topics of special education that will be filed with the General Assembly after the first of the year. I know our congressional delegation, Senator Murphy, in particular on the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee, has introduced many bills to help families of children with disabilities. Some of that legislation is moving forward, some of it is stalled. So it's very important that you be in touch with your elected officials, congresspeople, senators, state representatives, state senators, and just, look at the State Department of Education to see if there are the latest updates. They have guidance, policy guidance, they have superintendent's memos. There are a lot of things on the state website. So I can't stress, especially this time of year as we're in an election season, that you find out what your local, state, or federal representatives are thinking about you and your children. And with that, I would like to bring tonight's webinar to a close and thank all who are still with us for joining us. Especially want to thank my daughter, who's off to my immediate right, who's putting this all together. You are in touch with her. She's doing all the behind the scenes work to make these webinars happen. We are scheduling another webinar. I have October 29th. We will have Dr. Rachel Bussman, who's a psychologist and director of the Cognitive Behavioral Consultants. We welcome your questions in advance if you're registering for the next webinar. For those who presented questions tonight that we didn't get to, I do apologize. We do have a time limit. So I want to thank Jane, I want to thank Allie, and I'll let them offer their closing remarks.
Thank you for joining us tonight. It's been a really great discussion. If anybody needs any support after this webinar, please don't hesitate to contact me, myself, Allie, or Lawrence. And really look forward to you joining us in October. Dr. Rachel Bussman is an incredible human being. I've collaborated with her with a number of different clients, and she has some incredible insight to offer. So I hope you're able to join us in October for that conversation. In the meantime, just trust your intuition and don't be afraid to initiate a conversation with your child's teachers or the special related service practitioners. Don't wait for PPT to reach out and start connecting and engaging with them. And remember that data drives a lot of the decisions that hopefully can be made during a PPT and to create that collaboration. So good luck, and we look forward to seeing you again in October with Dr. Rachel Bussman. Allie, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you. And I want to thank everybody for attending tonight. I know it's a very busy time of year with open houses and school meetings and, meet and greet teachers and so forth. So if you attended tonight, we really appreciate your participation and wish you the best for this coming school year. As Jane said, don't hesitate to use your own self-initiative, and your kid the best. If there's a problem, start immediately working with the school. Hope to see you soon, and good night, everybody. Thank you again.
Thank you, and good night.